Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's lecture on how animals view death and knowing when it's time to let them go. We still have people joining us, so I'm going to start with a brief video as people are still joining here. And this is just going to be a 1-minute video and a little overview of Spring Farm Cares, just a little physical tour, and then we'll get started. In the meantime, we're going to be utilizing the chat box for questions today. So if you would like to start that, if you don't know where this is, if you're new to Zoom, the chat box is on the bottom of your screen. There should be a little a thing that says chat, and you can click on that and open up the chat box. And if you guys want to, while you're watching the video, leave us a chat message as to where you're from, that'll give us an idea of where you're all coming from. So that'd be great today. Thank you. Okay, so there we go. Sorry, I'm having a little technical glitch on my end here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Dawn,
Yes,
you want to go to speaker view?
I am on speaker view. Okay, we should be all set.
All set on this end. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right, so welcome everybody. It's good to have all of you with us today and sharing this hour. I'm going to be doing just a brief introduction here because it occurred to us. Hold on, because I'm distracted because I'm having one technical glitch on my end here. Let me just take care of this for a second. Okay. All right. Peg, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Very good. All right. So what we're going to do today is, as we're talking about this topic of death and how animals view death, people always assume it's a negative or a dark topic, which it's not at all. It's a very uplifting and light topic. So we're going to be exploring this together today for an hour. I'm going to talk for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then at the end of that time, well, I'm going to open it up for questions. We have two moderators here today, that be Peggy and Margaret, and they're on the box there. There they are waving. That says Peg Brown. And they're going to be answering, they're going to be moderating the chat box, and they're going to be the ones that'll ask me the questions. They'll ask me your questions, and we'll go from there. I'll do my best to answer all of the questions that we get. We'll see, how many questions you ask. This is a topic for me where I have a lot to say. Honestly, I teach a 2-day workshop just based on this topic. So there's in 1 hour, I can't possibly do this justice, but we're going to take a stab at it and at least start to introduce you to this topic. And the first thing that I want to do is I'd like all of you just to take a moment as we do this together, as we join in this space together for the next hour. I'd like all of you just to take a moment and just settle yourself. And settle yourself in your chair, in your seat, wherever you are, and just take a nice deep breath and slowly let it out. And then I just want you to breathe just a little bit deeper and longer than usual, not like huge deep breaths, but just a little bit more than normal. And I want you to do this for 3 or 4 breaths as we are here together. And I want you to think of an animal or a person, it could be here or in spirit, that where you feel just that incredible joy of connection and love. Think of that animal or person as you are breathing, and just feel that love and appreciation and gratitude. Just let that feeling fill your heart. And from there, we will proceed forward. To tell you a little bit about myself, we decided that we needed to do this in this lecture because we have several new people joining us that actually don't know much about me or Spring Farm Cares. So welcome to all of you. This is also being recorded, so this video will be available afterward. One of the important things I think to say is I've been a professional animal communicator since 1987, and I've worked with tens of thousands of animals and listened to their points of view and their feelings and thoughts and what they represent, what they want us to know. And I have a vast library of collections of experiences that I have with that. I also am the co-founder of Spring Farm Cares along with Bonnie Reynolds, and also my 2 moderators here, Margaret Onkel and Peggy Brown, are also directors here. So the 4 of us run Spring Farm Cares on a daily basis. So we're an animal and nature sanctuary. This background behind me that you see is actually an overview of Spring Farm Cares. So we're a pretty large place. We have about 250 animals in residence in our sanctuary, and we have about a 280-acre nature sanctuary as well. So we're a pretty large operation. We have about 25 employees, and our mission is to reconnect the human heart with animals and nature. So we are, while we do rescue animals, and we absolutely participate in a lot of rescue. What the animals really do here, they're actually working every single day. And with COVID, they've been a little bit unhappy because they haven't been able to have the visitors that they normally have. However, what we're about is people coming into our facility to meet these animals and to have their lives literally changed sometimes, and impacted by what the animals have to teach and what they have to share. So that is what we do. That's what we do here. And we've been, this year is our 30th anniversary, actually. So we've been in existence for 30 years, and we hope to be in existence for many, many, many more. So in dealing with this topic on animal death, and it's not just animal death, it's death in general, there's one thing that's certain in life, and that is that we're all going to be faced with death, either both our own and also our animals, our loved ones. Death is a topic that we can't get away from, that it's one way or another, at some point we will have to deal with. And it's also a topic that a lot of people don't like to talk about or think about. There's a lot of fear around it on the human side of things. However, on the animal side of things, that is not the case usually. So animals bring us a really unique perspective. And I can tell you for myself personally that as I started working in animal communication, I ended up really having some very major spiritual experiences for myself, and sitting with animals as they died and as they passed, and also doing the thousands and thousands of consultations with other people and their animals. Because the number one reason for me as an animal communicator, the number one call that I would get is, how do I know when it's time to let my animal go? And it's such a difficult topic, but it's such a beautiful, there's also a lot of beauty in death, and we tend as humans not to see that. And I would like to share a few of those things with you in this time that we have together. I like I said, I teach a 2-day workshop on this, so there's a lot to say. There's a lot from my heart that I really would like to share with you, because we don't understand a lot of what there is out there, because the human experience is really tainted with a lot of fear, and that becomes a problem. There's one message over and above anything else that I have been given by animals and also people who have crossed over into spirit about what they want us to know. And the number one overwhelming number one message is that that they want us to know that they still feel us. They're still connected to us. And I will discuss things throughout our time here this afternoon. I'm going to discuss a lot of aspects of this. But the biggest thing is that if you take nothing else away from this today, please take this with you. That when our friends leave, when our loved ones pass, we feel the distance, because physically we're physical beings in physical bodies. And when we can't see them, feel them, touch them, the perception is that they're gone. But in reality, if we could tap into the feelings and the energy of this, there is still, our heart connections are still alive and very strong. And they feel us from spirit. They hear us, they feel us. They try to give us messages. They try to communicate back to us. But in our grief, we often don't hear them. So this is so important to understand, because when one heart connects to another energetically, there is a real living connection. But that connection supersedes our physical bodies. And that connection stays with us even when one of the two connected passes into spirit. That connection is still just as alive. So what does that mean? So that means when you lose an animal or a human that you love, and they've crossed over, gone into spirit, that connection from your heart to them is still very much alive. And they feel it. They're aware of it. It's like they've stepped into another place, but they still can feel their heart connections. We, on this end, tend to see that they're missing. We can't touch them, as I said. And we go into this place of understanding that they're gone, and we get stuck in that place frequently. And we forget to go into our hearts, into that connection with them. And that's where we would actually feel them. So grief is a very natural part of things, and I don't think we can get away from that. I once read a quote that I think is so true, is that grief is the price we pay for loving. And I think that is very true. And grief, when we are feeling grief, that is when we are feeling the most separate from our loved ones in spirit. One of the things that I've worked with people years, and some of you on this call have worked with me for many years, and you know this because we've been through this together. But one of the things that I do in consultations with people, when I was doing consultations, is I would help them to feel that connection again. And one of the greatest ways we can do that is by just what we did at the beginning of this class, which is to remember our feelings of love for them. because when you start to do that and you start remembering joyful experiences you had with them, and memories come flooding back, and you think of the time, where they, if it's your dog, that's passed, and you come home and they'd run to the door, and you just had that feeling of just how much they love you. When you start remembering those things and you start laughing and smiling, that's when you actually are in connection to them. And it's in those moments when they connect to you. But when we're stuck in our grief, we're feeling the grief because we're feeling a loss. We're in that moment of grief, we are actually the most disconnected from them. We can talk more about this as we go on. I'm sure there are going to be questions on a lot of these things. So I'm just wanted to hit a few topics here to start with, and then we'll go to your questions. Animals are not socialized to fear death. So they don't, it's not handed down to them generation after generation that death is something to be afraid of. That happens with humans, though, a lot. I've seen, and I've run into that all of the time. If you think about this, we are taught that there are only limited number of humans that truly understand what death is. And we're taught that we need to listen to those humans about, so that they can tell us what death is about and what happens. And animals don't have that. So this is going to be a broad statement, but this has been true for any animal communicator that I have talked to. I have never, in all the thousands and thousands of consultations I've done over the last 30 years, I have never found an animal who was afraid to die. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that they're not often apprehensive or afraid of how they will die, but they're not afraid of death itself. Animals have an understanding of death. They understand that it's moving from one place to the next, and they understand that it's not over after that. They know that there's something more. Animals they also see death as another, it's not an end, it's just a beginning of something different, or that they're moving into something different. I want to share a story that was one of those life-changing moments for me. So we had just had a horse die. This is going back probably 25, 28 years ago. There was one of our horses that had died, and it was a horse that I was very, very close to, as is most of them, actually. And my heart was feeling really heavy. And even though the horse was old and I kind of saw this coming, the actual death was sudden. And I was not anticipating it that day. And we had a huge tour here, and I was expected to give this tour. There was a group coming in to hear me speak on something, and they were just assembling at the farm when I was called to the barn with this emergency. One of our horses had collapsed, and that horse died. And I was facing a group of 30 people that I now had to, put a smile on and give a tour. And that was a difficult moment for me. And I went to regroup, and I went and sat in a cat room, in one of our cat rooms. And suddenly this female cat came up on my lap, and she's like only cats can do. She stretched out on my chest, and she said, and she started purring, and she just laid her heart on top of my heart while she was purring. And she said to me, "Why are you so heavy? What is happening?" And I told her that I was incredibly sad because one of our horses had just died. And she sat there with me for a minute, and she just purred and purred. And then she says to me, "Do you remember last week when the litter of kittens was born here?" And of course I remembered that, because that was not a very common thing here, especially at the time. But somebody had dropped off a pregnant female cat, and she was going to give birth any day. And so she started to go into labor, and all the staff was, constantly looking to see how many kittens she had or whatever. And we finally put the rule down, leave this poor cat in peace and let her have her babies. But I kept going in and sneaking in and looking under the towel that was over her carrier so that I could see. And it was just the joy of watching these kittens be born. So this cat says to me, "Why were you so excited about that birth? What was so exciting about that?" And I said, Well, because we were welcoming these new beings into the world. I mean, we were welcoming and watching them come into the world. And it was exciting to welcome them. And she, in her very calm way, said to me, and where your horse friend just went, that's how her friends feel there in spirit. They are welcoming her with the same joy that you were welcoming your those kittens. And it was a stunning moment of realizing and fully seeing and feeling the circle of life. And she said to me, it just depends on which side of the circle you're on. So while you're sad to see your friend go, there are others in spirit who are having a party right now, welcoming her home. Just like you welcomed the kittens, somebody else was sad to see them go from where they were. So it just depends on what side of the circle you're on. That always has left a really lasting impression on me. And I try to remember that in times when I tend to forget, because I'm also able to do that. Animals in general are just not afraid to die. They just understand it's moving from one place to another. So I'll tell you another story. Margaret had been feeding up at our house. Margaret had thrown out, it was one particularly rough winter, lots of snow, and she had put some rabbit pellets, rabbit feed out underneath our deck on the side of our house. And I didn't know that she had done that, but I kept coming out in the morning, and for a while I'd see, rabbit tracks going by our house. There'd just be one or two. And then all of a sudden, over a week's period, it looked like we had a rabbit freeway. There were tracks everywhere. And I was saying something to Margaret one day that I didn't understand why we suddenly had so many rabbits here. And that's when she confessed that she was putting food out under the deck and feeding the rabbits. So one night we were sitting there in the house, and all of a sudden all of our cats ran to our bay window and they were looking out, and it was a full moon and the snow was out. So everything you could see, it was like daylight. And the cats were all watching something under the window. So we went to see what it was, and we turned off the lights inside the house, and we went and stood there in the window, and there must have been, I don't know, 25, 30 rabbits all in a row waiting in line for the food. And we were studying this because it was quite funny to watch all these rabbits, and they were so peacefully assembled, and they had one nice long line, and they would one would eat a few, eat for a little bit, would hop off, and then the next one would go eat. And they were all very peacefully, nobody was fighting over the food. And we were saying, wow, this is something that we humans should be learning from here and paying attention to. And suddenly it occurred to me, as this one rabbit was right under our window and looked up and saw us, and he stood up on his hind legs, and he stretched up and he was looking at us in the window. And I suddenly realized that not only had Margaret set up a feeding station for the rabbits, but we had just nicely created a feeding station for the owls, because there were this whole lineup of rabbits, just like ducks sitting there in the moonlight, just right out in the open. And so I suddenly yell at this rabbit, not yelled out loud, but telepathically I was yelling to him, hide, you need to get under something. You can't just stand out there in the open. You're going to get eaten by something. And this rabbit just stayed riveted and kept looking at me. And finally he says, wow, is that what it's like to be a human? That you're always worried about being eaten? And I said, well, I don't have to worry about being eaten, but you do. And that's when he said, no, that's not true, lady. We all get eaten. And it was a stunning moment from a rabbit's perspective, that death for a rabbit is being eaten. That's usually how they die. I mean, that is death for a rabbit. And he went on to tell me, we don't walk around. He said, I don't walk around all day wondering if today's the day I'm going to be eaten. He said, I just have to keep on living, because if you're just worried about that, he said, you're never going to live your life. And he said, no wonder why humans are so messed up. And that was from the rabbit's perspective. So I will stop for questions in 1 minute. I just want to bring up one more topic. And it's not to say that animals aren't afraid of how they will die, because they have concerns about that. Obviously, I mean that's an issue that we could that's a whole other issue that I don't want to actually get into right now because that's a huge issue. I do want to talk about euthanasia, however, because that's a common question that I'm asked, and I wanted to throw that in there right now. I once had and this was actually a veterinarian, say to me that for her own personal animals, that when she knows one of her animals is going to die, that she euthanizes them before they have to go through the death process. But I just want to say that even when we euthanize our animals, they still go through a death process. It's just that process looks different, but there's still a process. It's just that we don't see it. So there is a distinct process that happens when a being crosses into spirit, and that process, regardless if it's a natural death or a euthanasia, that process still happens the same way. And I guess you guys, I'm getting the hand signal here from my moderators that they have questions. So we'll go ahead and
Okay, you ready?
questions. Go ahead.
Okay. First question is, when I connect in my heart with a pet who has died, I've experienced that they will then come back to visit in a dream, but it is always 2 nights later. It's never that the same in the same night. It's the same thing with people who have passed as well. There's a 2-day lag before they come to visit. There's probably no answer to this, but it makes me wonder how things are arranged on, quote, the other side.
And that's a good question. And it varies for everybody. There's no hard and fast rule on any of this as to what happens. So a lot of times people will, people who and animals who cross will get in touch with us right away. Sometimes it takes longer, but there's never really a hard and fast rule on that. So I don't know why it's for you for every couple of days, but that's your pattern, and that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong here.
Okay, our next question is, what is the most ancient soul that you can remember that you have ever talked to? A dinosaur maybe, or something like that?
What's that, Margaret?
The most ancient soul that you have talked to, whether it may have been a dinosaur or something maybe more recent than that.
I haven't talked to a dinosaur. Wow, that's a tough question. I can honestly say that's the first time I've been asked that question. Some of the most ancient souls that I've talked to, though, are actually in stones and trees and really old spirits like that are inhabiting stones and trees. But that takes us to a whole other topic, doesn't it? Because now some of you that may be a new thought for, but anyway, I actually don't have an easy answer for that.
Take this one.
Go ahead.
Dawn,
Yep.
we have someone who had a rabbit that passed away a few years ago and sends a message by way of different things, heart shapes or in unexpected places. The rabbit seems to do that more when the participant is sad, and she feels it's a real gift. Is it true what you're saying, Dawn, that we are still connected by way of our hearts?
Absolutely. And many times they try to give us messages. I have this happen a lot. We have at Spring Farm, we have what we call our ghost brigade. And we've had so many animals pass here in 30 years that you can imagine. I mean, we focus on elder and hospice care. So we deal with a lot of death and dying in the death process. And so I get messages all the time from animals and people who have been trying to send me encouragement or whatever at times when I'm most in need. Sometimes it's in the form of another animal. I have a dear horse friend of mine, and actually she's my top animal mentor, named Teza. She was an Arabian mare, and she will, when I need, like when she really needs to bonk me over the head with something, she will appear to me as a red-tailed hawk, and I'll have the most incredible red-tailed hawk experiences happen. So that's for me, that's a sign when I have that she's really trying to get my attention. But they come to us in all sorts of ways. We need to watch for those. And uh, I got so many stories of people who have told me how their animals have reached out to them from spirit, and in what form, and it's pretty amazing.
Dawn,
Yes.
the next is not really a question, but I think it's
Should be addressed.
yeah, something that you could speak about. And it's a participant who says she still has guilt and she's not sure how to let that go about an animal who passed.
So this is I will absolutely speak to this, because this is a very common thing, and it's a very common thing that I'm often called for as an animal communicator. And I can tell you from my own personal experience too. Let me just first say this. A lot of times, and let me answer, I'm going to back up a second, because part of this lecture is also supposed to be on how we know when it's time to let them go. And this is a perfect example of how I can launch into this. Because I tell people all of the time, when you're dealing with an animal who's really ill and you're struggling with, how do I know when it's time to help them? How do I know when it's time to let them go? Rule of thumb, when you're struggling the most, it's actually because they're not ready, and you're struggling because you're feeling all of the angst about that. It's your angst about letting them go, but that animal's not ready to go yet, because when they're ready to go, it's suddenly clear. And it's never easy, but there's suddenly, you just know it. And when you know it and you make that decision, and you sit there with them, or however it unfolds for you, and you call your vet, and then the euthanasia happens and they're gone, and you knew in that moment that it was the right thing. But it's inevitable, and it's human nature that afterwards we doubt our decision and we second guess ourselves. It happens to me all the time. And it seems to be a human nature kind of deal, that we then question what it is that we just did. And a lot of people hold on to that guilt for a long time. Here's what I want to say about that. Our animals have and this is also for humans, it's not just animals, it's not just limited to animals. They understand the intention with what we're doing anything. Humans, we tend as humans to hold on to guilt till it sinks us, actually. And then sometimes we still don't let it go. It's our way of, beating ourselves up for something we don't actually understand. But the animals don't hold on to that. They just don't hold on to it. And it doesn't serve you when you are hanging on to that guilt. Again, that is when you're most disconnected from your loved ones. That's when you are not allowing them, when you're stuck in your guilt like that, you're actually not allowing them to come to you, which is what they want to do. They want to be able to get you messages. Second guessing your decisions is never helpful in the end. The animals understand you are doing the best that you can do with what you have at the time that you make these decisions. And, there are things in my life with animals. We've had hundreds, thousands probably now of them here at the farm. And there are things I know now that I didn't know 25 years ago, that I would make different decisions with animals here now because I know more than I would have 25 years ago. But it doesn't make me a bad person 25 years ago. I just didn't know what I know now. And we have to be able to let that go to move on, because we're not serving anybody. We're not serving ourselves. We're not serving them well.
The next question, please. I visited a friend today, and her dog seemed to be unusually close to me. I lost my very precious greyhound 3 weeks ago. It felt as if this dog was trying to comfort me. Is this possible?
It is absolutely possible, and it's also not just possible, but probable that that's what the dog was doing. I have seen my own dog. I have a wonderful yellow lab named Jessie, who is so empathetic. And I have seen him at times when I've brought him to our vet hospital. for him to get examined for something or whatever, or go in for physical therapy. And I've seen him sitting in the waiting room, just going and sitting next to somebody. I'll never forget this one particular woman who came over and said, "Your dog keeps staring at me. Can I pet him?" And I, of course you can pet him. And she sat down, and he just sat up against her and leaned into her for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. They weren't saying anything. She was just petting him. And then she calmly got up and left. But later he went in for his appointment then in the exam room. And when I came back out later, the front desk staff had told me that this woman had just lost her dog about 3-4 weeks before. And she had decided that she didn't want any animals anymore. But after she had spent that time with Jesse, she decided it was time, that she knew her dog wanted her to get another dog. But animals, they sense that about us, and they do want to comfort us. They do it all the time.
Go ahead, Mark.
Next question is, I had a session with another animal communicator a few months after my Shetland sheepdog, Gryphon died unexpectedly. She told me he wants to return in a few years. Do you have much experience with reincarnation of animals who come back into your life? Do you?
Yes, I have lots of experience with that. We have had, this is one of those topics that I always say to people, you when it happens to you, you believe it, you'll experience it. But if you don't believe in it, that's also fine. But I definitely have had animals come back. We've had some really specific ones here at the farm. I've had some that were, any of us that are here that have known these animals know for sure that's who it is. I'll just give you a story about one of them. We had an old little Shetland pony. She was actually a Shetland pony mix. She was tiny, named Bubbles. She came here very elderly. She came from a neglect case. She was in really bad shape. And but there were certain things she loved, and she loved people, but she loved donuts, and she had no teeth. And but soft donuts she could eat. People would give them to her as treats, and whether that's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's what happened. And she loved her donuts. And there were some people that came every weekend that would give her a piece of their donut. So when she passed, she had given me a message that she was going to come back, and she wanted to be born here at Spring Farm. Now, that's not a typical way that a horse would get in here, because we don't breed. And, unless we got a pregnant pony in here that, suddenly gave birth, that could be a way. But that was, it has happened here a few times that we've had that happen, but it's rare. So when I got this message that she was going to come back and she was going to be born here, I kind of, said, well, probably not going to happen. But then the deadly thing that happened for me, and that's deadly is probably not the word I should use, but anyway, this pony told me a date that she was going to come back. Now, this is very rare, and this is the only time for me that this has happened, and it put a lot of pressure on me when I got this. So let's just say it was May 15th. It was May something. I don't remember the exact date, but let's just, for the sake of the story, May 15th, she was going to come back and be born at the farm. So we didn't hear anything about any pregnant ponies, and it was now May 14th, and still there was nothing. So I gave up. In the morning of the 15th, I got a phone call about a neglect case with a whole bunch of ponies. There were like 40 of them, many of them pregnant, and would we be willing to take some? And that they were ready to give birth anytime. So I couldn't believe it. And of course we said yes. So when we got to the scene to go pick one up, we drove in, and the first thing they said to us was, well, we were mistaken. There aren't any pregnant ones. They all have had their foals already. Many of the foals had died, sadly, and there weren't any more. So we walked into this area of wall-to-wall ponies. That's all I could. There must have been 40 of them crammed into this little room in this barn. It was awful. They could barely move. They were shoulder to shoulder, all crammed in there. And in the back of this group, suddenly one of them made eye contact with me, and she managed to push her way all the way through all of those ponies and she put her head in my chest, and she just took a deep breath. And I turned to Margaret and Bonnie were there, and I turned to them and said, this is the one. And so we got her onto a trailer, and we got her home, and she actually was pregnant, and she didn't deliver that day, but it was like 2 weeks later that the foal was born. We named him Mr. Bubbles, because why not? So Mr. Bubbles was I think only a couple of weeks old. He was very, very young, and it was under a month, I'm sure of that, when we had an open house garage sale kind of thing here as a fundraiser on the farm. And so we thought, well, this will be good. People get to see this little cute little baby foal. I mean, baby pony. He was very, very tiny. And the people that usually brought the donuts came, and they had brought donuts for all of our staff, and they put them on a table in front of some of these horse stalls. And before I knew it, I turned and looked, and here's this foal managed to get out through the tubular gates where he was with his mother, and reached up and grabbed a bag of donuts and ripped it open and grabbed the donut out. I mean, that is not typical behavior of a foal, and all of us knew that Bubbles had come back. So we have lots of stories like that here. You know it when it happens to you, and that's all I can say is that when it happens, you know it.
Dawn, we have another question.
Okay.
Well, we have several more. But has an animal ever expressed that they were put down too soon? Whether the animal or the human was healthy or ill, the animal was not ready to leave this physical world or leave their human.
In all the years I've had that, been doing this, I had it happen once. And it was an animal that had not been euthanized yet, that was going to be euthanized. And I was actually being called to prepare the animal that she was being euthanized. And it was a horse, actually. And the horse was very angry that this decision had been made. So I just want to share this with you because it's the only one that I've had. And that decision was because it was a perfectly healthy horse. There was nothing wrong with her, but the babies that she were producing was not the right color. She was capable of producing a very unusual colored foal, but that's what these people had bought her for. And she wasn't producing that color. So they had decided to euthanize her because her foals that she did produce were incredibly athletic, and they didn't want to sell her to somebody else where they would then be showing against the offspring of this mare. And it was a particularly grueling consultation for me to do, and to deal with her, to understandably deal with her anger about that decision. That is the only case that I've had. I can tell you that the toughest ones, the toughest euthanasia decisions of all are euthanasia decisions due to behavioral problems, especially for young animals. And I've been involved with lots of those, unfortunately. I say unfortunately only because they're so difficult. And it's an incredibly difficult decision, one in which I personally had to make. And this story is on our website if anybody wants to read it. But I personally had to euthanize a dog at 20 months old. That was my heart and soul, and due to aggression. And I went through 18 months with him of trying everything, and all sorts of, thousands of dollars spent trying to help him. And I was convinced that if I loved him enough, that I could save him and that there wouldn't be any problem. But that was not the case. And there are a lot of animals with aggression issues. The problem with aggression in dogs in particular is that people will say the same thing to me all the time that I experienced. 99% of the time, the dog is an absolute loving being and is wonderful. But when they have these aggressive episodes, they're not, and they're very dangerous. So for me, it's a long story, which I won't get into the whole thing because it'll take me the whole rest of the class to tell the whole story. But I ended up having to make that decision. But when I did that, he was actually in a medical crisis at the time, one that we could have easily solved. I mean, it was not anything to euthanize him for. And he looked up at me and he said, you know, Mom, I can't do this anymore. And he was suffering with this aggression that he had that was not how he was. And it truly is an illness. We don't tend to look at it that way, but it truly is an illness. And he wanted to be released from that. So it's difficult. And I hope that answered the question.
Next question, Dawn. Do animals miss us when they die? I miss all my animals who have passed, but especially my dog Siggy and my cat Timmy. Do they miss me?
So this is going to be a hard one for some of you to hear. And the answer to this is they don't miss you like you miss them. And the reason is because they still connected to you. They still feel you. And so while we dreadfully miss them for all, like I said at the beginning of the class, because we can't touch them and see them, they still feel us. You know, they don't have a physical body that they are looking for us to touch them when they cross into spirit, but they can feel us. They still feel that connection, and they're still there. What I have found with some of them is frustration that you don't feel them, you know, that you're not aware. They try really hard to get messages to you sometimes. But so they are in a position in spirit where they have all those memories and all those experiences that they have with you, that they savor those, and they have that. So they don't miss you in the same way.
Dawn,
Yes.
we have another question. We have a participant who 2 weeks ago today lost a friend's dog who died suddenly. And she had spent a great deal of time with this dog. And she's asking, why do I feel such great grief in losing this wonderful dog? It was not her dog, but she enjoyed the happy attitude and intelligence of just being around her. And she's wondering why she feels so much grief in this loss.
And so the reason why she feels that grief is because a heart connection is a heart connection, and love is love. And when you have that connection, it's very real, whether it's your animal or not, whether it's your own. And grief is what we feel when we lose that that opportunity to be with them like that. So it's because the easy answer to that is because you love that dog and that dog loved you, and that's why you feel the loss.
There you go.
Okay. Do animals understand the euthanasia process and why we have taken that path with them? Usually we do that to alleviate their suffering.
Yes. And here's another thing I will say about that. When you're making a decision to euthanize your animal, it's important to understand that your animal is actually making that decision with you. Your animal is a part of that decision-making process, and they do understand. Again, they totally understand your intention. So, they are comfortable with that process in general. They're comfortable with it.
Okay, my last dog had canine dementia, and I belonged to a Facebook support group with others whose dogs had the same issue. So many of their dogs seem to be, quote, lost due to this disease and not enjoying life. Consequently, their people are always questioning if it is time to say goodbye. Can you shed some light on this, please? Thank you.
This is kind of a tough one because it also affects people as well with the same issues. And it doesn't always look like they're engaging with us because of the mental capacity. And I can't really give a blanket answer to this because it's going to depend on an individual animal. For some animals, just like for some people, they are not wanting to live with that. And I think those people that whose animals those are actually get that. I mean, I think that they feel that when it's time. Um, but sometimes they still have a quality of life that just looks different. And I think this is such an important point, because whether animals are dying a natural death or a euthanasia, one of the things that I also want to say that a lot of us hold on to is, let's just say your animal dies a natural death, and or dies before you could get them to a veterinarian to do anything. A lot of people hold on to this physical process, the physical death process, but the animal isn't experiencing trauma. There's a mechanism, and I think this is a really important point. And I have a wonderful veterinarian friend who said this to me once, and it's so true. We are all born knowing how to die. All of us. There's a mechanism that our bodies have in disconnecting from the body. We interfere with that sometimes medically, both in the human medical industry and also in the animal veterinary medicine. Sometimes drugs interfere with that natural letting go process, but all of us, the body knows how to die. And there's a mechanism that separates us from that physical process at the end. And I have experienced this with animals. I've experienced this with humans. And that's something I talk a lot about when I'm actually in the 2-day workshop. I can't really do that justice here because it's a long topic. But I know in my experiences, and something I'm absolutely sure of, that oftentimes what it looks like they're going through, and we look at it and say, oh my goodness, they're suffering, or they suffered, or and they're actually not. They're not feeling it that way. So same is true with mental incapacity kind of things, Alzheimer's, dementia. I had a dog with dementia. That's how he died. I had a yellow lab. And I remember the first day that I realized this. I was sitting at my desk here, and he was looking for me, and he kept walking past me, and he was, I knew he was looking for me. I talked to him. He just like didn't seem to recognize me. And he kept looking in all the places I would be. And then about his 4th time around the circle around our house, and he came back by my office door again, and he saw me, and he was like, oh, there you are. And he came wandering in. And it was one of the saddest days of my life, because I realized what was happening with him. And he ended up, and this is for a lab, this is a very difficult thing. He ended up where his brain deteriorated to the point where he couldn't figure out how to eat. And he could still lap water, but he couldn't figure out how to eat. And that lasted only a couple of days, when he couldn't move his tongue anymore either. And then it was time to let him go. But he was very specific with me when it started that he wasn't ready. And then there was a day when suddenly he was ready.
Dawn, there's a couple of questions that I think are very similar, so I'm going to put them together. One participant asks, how do you know if or when it's better to euthanize a pet who is wasting away, or allow the pet to die naturally? And another question is saying, I'm clear on what I will look for when it's time. Her dog is a mooch, and when he stops eating, she feels that is a sign. But one, I feel he is ready. How do I communicate that to him?
Usually, okay, that's a very good question. They usually know, because they're picking up everything, your thoughts, as you're going through this process with them, they're in the process with you. So they're following along with you. They understand what's happening. I have seen animals stay longer until they were sure their people were ready to let them go. I've seen that happen a lot. There's no right or wrong. It's a process that you're going through together. And there is no right or wrong. There's no judgment. They don't offer judgment, and we don't. And I just want to say this to anybody who's faced with this, because a lot of times other humans around us will see us in pain because you're sad, you know that your animal's sick, and you know that there's a decision coming up. Or there's an animal who's very debilitated, and your friends and your family will say to you, they're suffering, just let them go. And they're actually saying to you, you're suffering, just let them go. But if it feels to you they're not ready, they're not ready. So it's okay to go through this process. You don't, they understand what you're doing. So you don't need to have a, you know, I mean, you can just talk to them and say, you know, it's when you talk to them verbally, they understand you. So when you're explaining to them, you know, the vet is going to come, we're going to help you, they get all of that. They totally get it. And just from you talking to them about it, they get it.
Comment there, please. In our own household, just within the last few years, we had several animals that passed on. And there were two of them, a dog and a cat, and they basically stopped eating. Also, some 10 years ago, we had another dog, the same thing, she stopped eating. And we every day almost said, well, how much longer? And then came the day that when we knew the day was the day, because the signs they gave us were very, very clear, despite the fact they hadn't eaten like for 10 days or something like that.
Yeah.
But when the day came, we knew. It was very clear, even to me, and I'm not the animal communicator.
Yeah, it's eating is not always a factor in when they're ready to go. I mean, for some of them it is, but not all. You know, it's not true for all of them. There's no hard and fast on that.
Okay.
I think, Dawn, that does anyone else have any questions? Please put them in the chat box.
Okay, we're just on the last couple of minutes now anyway.
Thank you, Dawn, for everything.
Yeah, so thank you everybody. Thank you. Like I said, this is a big topic, and it's one that we could only do a little bit on in this 1 hour, but hopefully it was helpful to all of you, or some of you at least. And thank you all for being here. We will be having our next lecture in the series is on August 5th, and it's going to be in the evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and it's understanding animals and our relationships with them, and that'll be the next one. Hopefully this recording has come out the way I had hoped to, and we will get this one up online. We thank everybody for your patience. We're still learning this platform, and every time we think we have it, we find out that we don't. So hopefully we got this one. Anyway, thank you all very much for being here. And just remember, please, when you end this today, when we all end, if you could just take a few minutes, or doesn't even have to be 4 or 5 breaths, just settle yourself for a minute, do some deep breathing, and gratitude and appreciation and love for your animals. And it really makes a difference. So please do that for them and with them. And thank you all very much.